Days of the week, I think run a little bit better, but that's because it's a bit more intuitive.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to start filming. So, tell me when, Ryan. So we are going to start walking around here in a bit. So,
Yep, we're set.
tell me when we're live. Right. How you doing, everybody? So it's a little bit snowy out today. So since we didn't have that heavy of a crowd here, we decided we're going to live stream our snake feeding. We haven't live streamed one of these in a while, and also this is going to be a good opportunity to introduce a couple of our newer snakes. We have two particularly new snakes, one snake who never got a really good formal introduction. So you're going to be meeting probably some of you who haven't been here for a few months, three of our snakes for kind of the first time. But we are going to start our snake feeding with probably one of our old favorites, and that's Rusty, one of our two big boas. And he is going to demonstrate some of the basic principles that we have on our snake feedings. How snakes eat, how they strike at their food. And he's also great for just going through the different stages of eating, because snakes eating is a little bit weird. So, for the people here, I'm going to really quick go over the rules, and then we'll start snake feeding. So, when I'm opening up the tanks, I need nobody else's hands near these open tanks, because when we put the newspaper in, that's us telling the snakes the next thing that goes in is food, meaning they're allowed to bite it. This is one of the things we do. We make sure there's a nice routine. That way, our animals know when they can and can't fight, which is why it's so safe to have animals. They're on a good routine, they have good habits, and we want to reinforce those. The other thing is to make sure people can see the tank. And then lastly, just for today's feeding, being a little bit nice and quieter. If you have any questions, we'll do questions at the end, and we'll try to answer as many as possible. We might take a few from on the live stream. So Rusty is one of our two bigger boas, and he is a pretty consistent eater. He also is a pretty consistent striker of his food. He really does demonstrate all these steps pretty distinctly. So I'm going to open up this tank, and I'm going to offer the rat. So anyone who's squeamish, now is a good time to look away, because we do feed real rodents, just not live. We feed frozen rodents that are reheated. All right. So Rusty is going to probably strike at this, and this is kind of nice. So I'm going to step one step to the right. So Ryan, you got a view on that?
Not really, but it's more the newspaper than anything.
So that strike is something that constrictors do. It's relatively fast, and what they want to do then is wrap the front of their body around something, because they want to make sure they have a good hold of it, because in the wild their prey item would actually still be alive and struggling, and they want to restrain it as much as possible. Rusty here is what we call a constrictor. Now constrictors, they are not venomous typically, meaning that it's fine. Yeah, they have to squeeze their prey, and they're not necessarily strangling it, which is what people used to think, but they're actually restricting blood flow, which cuts off oxygen. There are times where a snake will be constricting its prey, and they can fully breathe, but since they've kind of restricted blood flow, that animal's not getting oxygen to very crucial organs. And it's actually more efficient than strangulation. And right now, Rusty is just kind of holding it for now. He's going to go through that instinctual sort of thing. So we're going to head over to our next snake, and we're going to go to Casper.
Yep, so he's going around doing feeding, so you guys can go check it out.
So actually, this is one of our newer snakes. It's probably the introduction of Casper.
Yeah. We'll prioritize the live audience.
And we'll introduce this snake at the end of that. So this is one of our three ball pythons. And he actually hasn't eaten with us yet. Some snakes don't like to eat with this crowd. You know what I'm off? You can see he's a little bit shy from the crowd. So I'm going to leave this in here for him, and he might come back to that later. This is actually pretty common, especially with ball pythons. We've had him for about a month, and he's actually yet to eat with us. We had one of our older ball pythons here just for about 3 months. And that's perfectly normal. These things actually go about 14 months without food. So we're going to go to our small hognose snake next. Yeah, so we got different sized rodents. You might notice one is giving a really big rat. And looks like the camera's coming back in. These clips can be a bit frustrating sometimes. So I'm going to get him on top of the newspaper. I normally don't recommend doing this with Snake, but he's pretty small, so I'm pretty confident he's not going to just get me. Yeah, what's that, Sally? And that digging kind of behavior he's doing is pretty normal for hognoses. They tend to like to dig for their food anyway in the wild. So it's an instinctual thing. Sally, that's the newspaper. Yeah. It's over here. Come on. Yeah, that's right. Okay. He's also old and blind, so this can be a little bit of a challenge for Sally. Believe in you. I don't believe me. There we go. Sometimes you just gotta hand it to him. Okay, he's gonna kind of work away at that. We are gonna do basil next. So this is another one where again, I need everyone's hands away from this thing. Yeah. She really loves striking at her food, and she's actually got pretty bad aim sometimes. So everyone can see her. This is the first time we fed her in this tank, so this is a little bit of a challenge. Oh! Got herself there. There we go. She's, like I said, sometimes the aiming you might miss their camera with key selection. Charlie is pretty fast. Yeah, he's going to swallow it. And snakes actually have 10 different articulating jaw bones, which means that basically their jaws hinge in more places. And Charlie's pretty quick at it, honestly. Once he gets like a scent of it, he's like, whoa, goes for it. So our next snake's actually one of my favorites. This is Zora. Zora is a snake.
I wanted to get a snake, but guys will let me.
They're actually pretty well handleable, but yeah, some parents are a little bit less comfy with their reptiles than others. Zora, come in. The snakes aren't always the cleverest, so you can kind of be waving this thing around and they won't always notice. So I'm trying to get his attention over here, and he is really trying to take it.
This would be a typical
prey
for...
Yeah, this would be typical food for him. Yeah, and this is also pretty typical snake behavior in captivity.
Would a snake that size take up?
No, he actually physically can't get that in his body. Zoro, my buddy. They aren't the smartest birds.
Zoro's also coming into a shed here pretty soon.
So this might be his first skipped meal. Hey, buddy. Yeah, I'm smelling it.
And even if they don't strike it during feeding, that doesn't mean they won't take it. A lot of the times they'll just pick it up later. We see that a lot with like Artemis. She takes hers overnight a lot of the time.
Yeah, she's actually even been leaving them overnight recently. So we're going to try our smallest snake next. So this is Crowley. Crowley just came out of a long period of not eating. So there we go. There was a strike. That was a strike from Crowley. Yeah, a little strike, but still strike. And we're going to go for out there. So, Rusty. Because Ryan, is Rusty at where I think he will be?
He's not really starting to swallow yet, but probably pretty soon here.
I set this up here. So, one thing with snakes, since they have 10 articulating jaw bones, they're able to open their mouths in ways that for other animals are just physically impossible. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. They have 2 upper jaw bones and 8 lower jaw bones. And those enable them to stretch, and they have a lot of extra skin on their heads. So they're able to stretch and swallow things larger than their own head, which is useful when you don't have arms or legs to like part out stuff, you know, when you can't tear something apart. Since they have to basically swallow it whole. Ryan, what's another thing that you kind of like about snakes eating? What's one of your favorite things about how they do this?
Well, the trachea coming up is kind of cool.
Yeah, so this is a great one because like a lot of animals can't breathe and eat at the same time. So Ryan, like, will you describe the trachea, like how it does that?
So probably not going to see it from the angle we're looking at right now, but if you're looking at them from like straight ahead while they're eating, one of the things that you'll sometimes see is like a little tube kind of pop up out of their mouth. And basically what that is like their trachea or their windpipe. And when you have a mouthful of food that, it's been 10 minutes basically since we fed Rusty and he still has a mouthful, you still got to breathe during all that time. And obviously when your mouth is that full, it's tricky, so you got to come up with a way to do it. And so snakes are able to like basically push their tracheas up into their mouth and use it basically like a little snorkel to get around the big food item when they're holding it. So that's kind of an interesting thing to watch. The other thing that Carl was mentioning is he was talking about how all the different jawbone joints, all the different joints in the jaw allow it to articulate and swallow these big prey items. It's also something you can like use to like see them as they like actually get into the swallowing process, which we were seeing a little bit with the smaller snakes, is they're able to like move the different parts of their jaw independently of one another. And so, like Carl was saying, it's tricky to like kind of parse something out when you don't have any arms or hands or like a big strong tongue like we do. But being able to move all the different parts of their jaw independently is what actually lets them get these food items down.
Big mouth, isn't it?
And you can sometimes see it with Rusty where you'll see it's almost like army crawl when he's doing with the two lower parts of his jaw there.
And the two uppers. You'll see it every now and then. It's a lot less extreme though, because they are a little bit more attached to joint-wise to other bones, but they are still floating. Oh, there's another thing you always like pointing out when they get towards the end of eating, especially Rusty.
Yeah, where they gotta like go at that kind of specific angle to actually get
it gets past all those jawbones, and suddenly they don't have a good ability to walk it in because there's no. It's just the muscles of the throat, and that's not always enough to get it, especially for these larger snakes.
So yeah, you'll see them raise their head up and adopt
Gravity,
a pretty
basically.
like standardized angle when they're swallowing their food that is apparently the optimal one for them for actually getting these large prey items down.
And then another one you pointed out when we were first doing this, when you were teaching me snake feeding, they have a lot of extra skin on their face, but not necessarily extra like scales. So you'll get a lot of like space between the scales where you'll actually see skin when it's stretching.
And you can maybe see that right now with Rusty. It's not always the best one to show it because the scales on his chin are kind of the same color as the skin underneath. But it's kind of an interesting thing where, we almost think of the scales as being like the skin of the snake, but they're attached to something under there, and they have like a lower layer of skin that.
The turtle is fascinated by this.
Oh yeah, one of our new box turtles kind of watching this with the gut.
Yeah, new neighbor over here. So we got a couple new snakes, but we also got
This guy.
a new turtle over here who's just moved in next door to Rusty's tank. So this is his first snake feeding that he's getting to watch too.
This has got to be a little bit off-putting for the other animals, I just realized over here. If you actually want to go look at Crowley, he's at a really interesting stage. So he's our smaller fella. They're actually the same snakes Rusty is. And Crowley. He's actually kind of doing the reverse of the tilt back. He's like using gravity to help force himself onto
You'll
his...
see Basil do that sometimes too, where she'll like use the from above gravity to.
Yeah, just kind of like try to just push down on it. It's very funny. This is Zorro, potentially his first skip meal. Zorro's also Crowley's new neighbor. Brian did a little bit of rearranging and new introductions over here.
One of the interesting things about milk snakes is they're a type of king snake, and king snakes are one of the like very few types of snakes that'll actually like eat other snakes. So
Yeah.
I sort of picked neighbors based on. I put Crowley next to him because I was like, well, he's under the sand most of the time and isn't going to be visible to the snake that eats other snakes.
Yeah, and another kind of cool thing about king snakes, so I grew up in California, and we have some quite prominent species of king snakes that actually specifically hunt venomous snakes. A lot of king snakes are resistant to snake venom, and it's a good thing to have when the animal you hunt is venomous. You want to be a bit resistant, sort of like how mongoose and meerkats are resistant to a lot of venoms as well. But yeah, they're very fascinating snakes, and they often mimic venomous snakes as well in appearance to deter their predators.
Yeah, and ours looks a little different than the milk snakes that people are probably most familiar with in the U.S. with the orange, red, and black and white stripes.
Yeah, the Honduran milk snakes are mostly red and black, but they do mimic, actually, ironically, a subspecies of the snake the ones up here mimic, which is a coral snake. And they look just enough like it where animals will see it and go, nope. So he actually might be investigating that mouse, so we want to see him eat.
Look at that.
This is the first time we fed Zorro. He was a little bit kind of like, oh, maybe I will, maybe I won't. And the second time I fed him, he struck, so this might be more like the first time he ate.
Oh, there's the one to hit. Look at.
Yeah, so look at this, He's going in for it. He's getting a good whiff of the smell.
He's got a mouse in there. He doesn't want.
So stay right there. Yeah, so he's investigating it. So Zorro's actually kind of a curious snake, which is kind of nice for a snake living here.
Where's the snake want to be like?
Here, let's scooch this one step this way. But yeah, see that?
Pushing it around.
This is the great, like, hey, you alive? Man, this is very inquisitive behavior.
Between the nose and the mouth.
So snakes aren't the smartest creatures, and they are pretty cautious, but like any animal, they are curious of new stuff.
Yeah, you should have seen him the first day we put him into this new tank. He was crawling all over the place in it.
Oh, I would have loved to see that. When we first got him, he's a very active snake, honestly. Yeah, he's a
He was
handsome
like
snake.
propping himself up on the little like gauges in the back and using it to get all the way up into the corners.
Yeah, he loves being like, okay, what can I do? He's also a great snake. He's not so much a pass around, to people snake, but he loves interacting. He just likes to have a consistent hold on something.
You pick him out and he immediately just wraps around your forearm and it's like, this is my spot, I'm into it.
And that's just, every snake's got their own kind of preferences, and that's one of the things working here. We like to make sure we work around. We don't want to push these animals too far out of their comfort zones. Okay. It's very funny. This is like the third time in a row that Casper has been kind of like, I'm gonna just...
Wing nut on there.
I was kind of tempted to use the little hatch this time, but...
Yeah, I kind of like just having the hatch be closed. Especially with him, he's active enough that he'll try and get out of there if we forget to lock it down.
Which is a thing with snakes. You want to make sure you keep track of them, because they can't get... Oh, he's gone to eating. He's gone to eating. Here, you want to come this way, see?
Yeah.
So Zorro is going for eating now. It was a very quick turn suddenly there.
Hey, Roy, look. Roy, look.
He actually, I don't know if I've ever seen him constrict his food, which is kind of interesting. Because he is a constrictor.
Look at this snake over here, Roy.
I guess also this is like kind of the informal introduction to Charlie today as well.
Yeah. Charlie's been here a little longer, but he's been mostly down in the basement. And he probably hasn't appeared on a stream yet.
And he has also finished his dinner and dived under the newspaper.
Yeah, we were watching Charlie a little bit earlier when he was...
Yeah, Charlie is our albino checkered garter snake. Well, not the individual species we have around here. We do have close relatives of Charlie up here, and he is a pretty quick snake, but he's also a pretty fun one. He's been doing pretty well up here.
Yeah, and he was a little under a year old when we got him, so he's probably, I don't know, a year and a half now.
Yeah. So he's about full size.
Yeah.
Snakes tend to grow the most in their first year or two of life. Past that, the growth rate pretty dramatically slows. I mean, Crowley is a great example. He's our smallest snake, and he's about, what, like 2 years old now? 3?
Yeah, I don't know how old he was when we got him.
Yeah, he's not an old snake by any means, but he's definitely past that prime growing period. He is definitely our smallest.
He's small. Yeah, he's smaller than Charlie.
Oh yeah. He is by far the lightest and the shortest. There was a bit of a debate at one point, I think Yumi and Lee were having, which was, who's smaller? Is it Charlie or Sally? And I tend to lean towards Charlie being smaller than Sally, because Sally's actually pretty hefty for a snake his size. This is actually a great time to look at Crowley again.
He's starting to actually get around it, finally, here too. There's too much activity happening. I need more cameras. More angles.
Oh, that'd be great to have like multi-camera. It looks like Rusty's kind of stalled.
He's got like a foot that's like poking out on the
Why
side,
should
so he's got
Lester
to
want
negotiate.
Basil's doing great. Basil's at the. I like your boots. I like the unicorn boots. Basil is coming at it from the back end. That's eating from the wrong end of the ice cream cone if I've ever seen it. I'm actually gonna get a picture of that on the phone because that is.
Riley looks like he's done.
I'm gonna give him a few minutes.
And then I'll get him back in his tank.
So
So one of the things you might notice with most of our snakes is we put newspaper down. We explained that at the beginning of the stream, but you might notice Crowley is a little bit different. When he came to us, we were told that he went into a separate tank for feeding, so we wanted to keep that routine.
Yeah, and because of sort of the nature of him where he likes to stay buried underneath the sand most of the time, the first couple times we fed him, we tried to put like a little newspaper in there and put the food on there, but he wouldn't come out from under the sand to do it. So you'll see in the tank that we feed him in, he doesn't have any sand to hide in, basically. And we've found more success actually feeding him that way.
I think Zorro is a great example of showing how much they can stretch, because if you look at his head and neck, they're like expanded a lot.
And you can see that nice like cream-colored skin between his darker scales too.
Yeah, I do love that. That's a great thing to point out, is that like a lot of people tend to think, oh, scales are just like the skin of reptiles, but really it's just a skin covering, kind of like hair or feathers.
and it's
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I think the fact that we describe like when they're shedding, we call it shedding their skin, I think doesn't do any favors as far as like people understanding what's actually happening there.
Yeah, so yummy, Freddy Bird.
'Cause again, they're not like really shedding the like underlayer of the skin much.
just that.
It's just an outer layer on the scales that is getting sloughed off.
He is a handsome snake, dude.
So you see the same thing happening. I mean, neighbor that we got here for all of our snakes is these little snapping turtles. And you'll see, these guys might be making a stream debut too here, who knows?
I think so.
But you'll see, like, even turtles shed, and a lot of times people aren't aware of that, but they shed layers, like, off of their shell.
And they shed like one scoot at a
yeah,
time.
they shed, one plate, basically, off their scale
Ew, fish.
independently.
The first friend.
They are a little bit. They are friends.
We'll check on Artemis.
Yeah.
Isn't doing much over there.
She hasn't eaten in about a month and a half.
Yeah, and she's coming into a shed, too, so...
You ever see a snake? So one of the things I don't think I've actually talked about on stream is the type of teeth that these constrictors have. They're called iglyphus teeth, and they're very small, little conical teeth that all point backwards. I think we explain it to people who come in, but the big advantage of that for a constrictor is they can grab their food and then it can't get away.
Around over to Basil.
So what stage is she at? Oh, she moved.
Moving right now.
So she actually had it about halfway in from the back end when I went over here for a bit.
So she's rotated and she's going around to the face. Every once in a while you'll see it swallow and tail first, but usually they try and swallow head first.
And there is a reason for that. Biomechanically, the animal that they're eating's body will tend to go down a little bit easier if they can.
Rats are nice and torpedo shaped from the front end.
Yeah.
He's gotta like do some exercise before he can justify eating. There's that guy at the gym who's like sitting on the elliptical and is like, okay, I did 800 calories. I can eat a cup of yogurt now.
Very cool. So one of the other things you notice that with these snakes is after I touch the rats, I don't stick my hands in there, and that's just because it's a great thing to talk about actually specifically this snake. Basil is a great example of a snake who, once she smells like a rat, that's a very clear signal to her that's food. I've had an incident with her where I was getting ready for a feeding. There was a big crowd, and my hand smelled like rat, and I had to adjust her. But my hand smelled like a rat, and it was moving. It was in there. The newspaper was there, and she did actually get me with a little bite. And Ryan helped me with that. But it's something where it's why consistency is important. It's why keeping your head on your shoulders is important. Because otherwise, that's when accidents happen.
So I've been bitten a handful of times here, and probably 80% of the time it's been during feedings.
That is like the most likely time for handling snakes to get bitten. And that's the thing, we're just, again, being mindful about what you're doing and actually being focused on what you're doing will likely prevent that. I've only ever been bitten by actually one snake, and that's Basil right here, and I still handle her most days because she is still a very professional snake. She is actually quite friendly most days. When she's shedding, she is a little bit cranky sometimes, but even then, she's still very friendly. Ball pythons in general tend to be quite gentle snakes, even when they're in a bad mood.
Yeah, and long-time viewers will remember Jeannie, who has been in all of these streams up until this one. This is, I guess, her retirement stream, I guess. And she's not here. She's still alive. She's not gone. She's just down in the basement. But now that we have Basil, and now that we got Casper just now, we decided there wasn't a whole lot of reason to have 3 ball pythons out on the floor, so we took Jeannie.
She's old, too.
Yeah, Jeannie's probably about a 30-year-old snake. So she's down in the basement, and she's kind of been adopted as one of the after-school club pets now. A little bit less handling burden on her, but she's still got fed today. We're still keeping her on the same feeding schedule. It's not happening on stream.
Yeah, she's, as we say, like Kepler, our legless lizard, she's retired. And, okay, Basil is also doing a thing where she's trying to get his legs first.
Yeah, and you can see...
That ain't gonna work.
You can see those either side of the upper jaw moving a little bit there as she's readjusting.
Ball pythons are actually another really good snake for watching. Just because they have very large heads. It's one of the good things about being a large constrictor is everything's a bit easier to see. One of the things we didn't actually go into in this is, so we have like kind of 3 general sizes of snakes here. We have large constrictors like Basil and the big boas and Casper. Zorro is kind of our only medium-sized snake when it comes to like what he eats, and the rest of them are small.
R.I.P. Sophie.
Yeah. Another band-aid to pull off on the live stream, I guess.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, Noodle and Sophie, our corn snakes, did pass away this winter.
Yeah.
Noodle had a health complication from a mealtime, and Sophie, who came to us with health issues.
So Sophie passed of a pre-existing condition, basically. Noodle
ingested
some. Noodle had a physical
block.
Yeah, had a rupture that occurred internally after eating some substrate from her tank.
Which is another reason why we're always very, very strict on putting the newspaper down, especially for our snakes who have this tan bark material. It's actually something a couple feedings ago, for Christmas, someone probably saw me if you've been watching this and been here in person. One time, Rusty pulled his rat out the newspaper, and you probably saw me fully reach in there. In animal care, one of the things we call it is risk assessment, which is I could get bit, but if the snake eats that, he could have a rupture and die.
And
I'm more willing to get bit than have him have that health issue.
Yeah. And Rusty tends to be the one who tends to do that. He moves around a lot more while he's eating than the rest of them do, and so every once in a while you'll see him get his food off of his newspapers. And like the way I tend to think about it is like, he typically has a full mouth when that happens, so I'm not as worried about reaching in there. I never reach in like before I feed him, but once he's got the food in his mouth, I'm less worried about him biting me, because what's he gonna do, drop the rat?
Yeah.
Not Rusty, he loves that rat.
Yeah, and those teeth that we were talking about, the glyphus teeth make it really difficult to drop anything, is the best bit.
Yeah. Which, again, going back to when you got bit by Basil, proved to be a little bit of a problem too, where even though she probably wanted to let go of you, she was in kind of a weird position where she couldn't very easily. It's kind of like, when your cat is scratching a thing and gets its claws stuck in your pants or your blanket or whatever. Yeah.
It's not going to come pulling. Yeah, no, Basil, that one time, Basil was like, she wrapped her in my hand, and then as soon as she realized I wasn't a rat, I think it became like much easier to get her off. It was one of those things where she's like, hey, wait a second, this is a little bit big. This Now it's just smelling like a rat. But yeah, and also haven't had an issue since. Just keeping that consistent routine with them is the big deal, and I like to stress that. These are animals of habit, and that's the best thing to do is just keep a routine with them.
Yeah, and so you'll see a lot of people will do like complete tank changes when they do feedings. We just like realistically don't have the infrastructure for that here. We don't have enough tanks, we don't have enough space to do that. So taking everything out and putting the newspapers down is sort of our equivalent of that. And like Carl was saying earlier, like it just trains them to be like, okay, now is the time to strike at a thing and bite a thing.
And this is why we're so confident reaching in every other time. You'll notice when you come here, we're pretty confident reaching into our snake's tanks that we're not going to get bit. And that's because they are creatures of habit and they are very well conditioned for this.
Yeah, our snakes get handled more than just about any other snakes in the world, probably.
Yeah,
our snakes get a lot of handling here.
Very few snakes get handled every single day. Zoos that you go to, those snakes aren't handled every day. Those snakes are actually probably only handled about once a week. Other museums like us, even that do animal handling, probably once a day is their thing. We handle our animals multiple times a day, which is one of the reasons why we also like to make sure we get animals that have the temperament for this type of work, because there is individual variation, and that's the thing why we're always a little bit cautious when we get a new animal.
We've had animals come in and have to try out and decide that this isn't the spot for them and moved along. It's been a thing that we've done in the past. Part of the reason why, like I said, we said we're introducing, Casper and Zorro today, but Casper and Zorro have been here for I've been here for about a month now.
Month and a half.
And so they, despite being new, have been here for a while. And what we've been doing in that intervening month is, one, just keeping them in quarantine for the sake of making sure they're not going to bring any illnesses that are going to affect their other animals. But also, it's an opportunity for us to be able to do handling with them in private so that we can get some sort of assessment of how well they handle, like, getting picked up and passed around and put on shoulders versus held in hands. It's training them in for being out on the exhibit floor and doing the degree of handling that we do.
And then also just assessing, like Ryan said, like we've had animals just wash out of working here where it's like, this is clearly not what this individual animal wants. Mm-hmm. That was like a thing where we were really, really particular with actually the new snakes, Casper and Zorro. We really wanted to make sure that they were of the personality that this, and the temperament and disposition that this was going to be actually healthy for them. Because we can train snakes to do this, but if the animal doesn't have natural temperament, it's just a lot of stress.
Well, and the other part about it is we typically aren't raising snakes from a very young age. Like they almost always come to us as adults, and so getting them from the norm that they're used to and into this new norm sometimes takes some time.
It can be a serious.
We find that it's easier to do that than raise baby snakes.
That's one of the things. Baby snakes have a lot of health complications that come with it, and that's just normal for snakes. That was one of the things why, like, what happened to Noodle is pretty common, honestly. It's unfortunate, but it is something that we have to deal with a lot, and so we have to deal with the baby snakes, which is one of the reasons, like Ryan said, we don't like doing that.
Yeah.
It's easy to get attached to an animal, and then it's gone.
Yeah, normally we don't take that type of stuff. Noodle was kind of a special occasion where Noodle was found abandoned. Was found in somebody's trash can, actually.
Really?
In like an apartment complex. So somebody had thrown him out, or he had gotten out and somehow found his way into a garbage can, and one of the other staff actually brought him in. And
which, by the way, if you get a pet reptile and realize after getting it and getting all set up that it's a bit much for you, you can always take it back to the pet store. You can always find, there are rescues, there are places you can take them. This just goes for any pet. Don't just toss pets in the trash. This is just a PSA. Don't toss your pets in the trash.
Don't release them out into the wild either.
Yeah, please don't release them, especially reptiles.
Especially around here.
Yeah, they aren't going to do well out here. But just, don't throw your animals out if you don't want them. That's not great for animals, especially if they're in environments they're not suited for, and especially just because that's cruel. You wouldn't You wouldn't do that to
So,
like.
and even if they are successful out there, a lot of the times they're not going to be healthy for the environments you put them in. That's a great example of that. Is we have Vinny the red-eared slider upstairs,
Vinny's
who
invasive.
yeah, red-eared sliders are an animal that can survive in the wild around here, but we now have an invasive population of them in Minnesota that shouldn't be here because so many people have like gotten them as pets and then released them basically because they
Don't realize they don't live around here.
Yes.
Yeah. And they're not the healthiest for fish populations, nor for water invertebrate populations.
they're not as bad as a lot of invasives are, but really the things that they're not great for are the painted turtles because they compete with them, but they're bigger, so they tend to bully the painted turtles around. So they're not great for painted turtle populations. It's the same kind of deal as like what the rusty crayfish is, where it like doesn't necessarily have a huge impact on other like the larger ecosystem, but they're real bad news for the northern crayfish because it's like, oh, I'm doing the same thing except I'm bigger, so I can like beat you up and steal your turf. Cool.
Yeah. Some funny little noises.
Casper?
Yeah. Yeah, I just noticed it make a little. I've never heard that noise out of a snake before.
Yeah, and one of the things you'll notice with Casper is that he has a cleft palate, which is oftentimes a byproduct of inbreeding.
Yeah.
And you'll see that a lot of the times in the like pet snake trade, especially when they're breeding for sort of typically traits that aren't typically found very commonly in wild versions of that animal. But when you're a breeder, you a lot of times want those traits. And so what you end up doing is breeding practices that get you the trait you want, but oftentimes come at the detriment of other
Like
health things.
Yeah,
So-
he wheezes when he breathes. Yep, there's those noises. He wheezes when he breathes, he's got the cleft palate. And then there's the traits that come with being an albino, which is lack of pigment. He sunburns easily.
Yeah.
His eyes don't have pigment to protect them like most animals, so he's gonna have eye issues all his life.
Yeah, susceptible to skin cancers and things like that. Like I said, vision issues, degenerative issues like that. Like you were saying, a lot of boas and pythons that you find in the pet trade have respiratory problems.
Even Rusty has minor ones.
Yeah, you'll hear Rusty kind of wheezing a lot of the times when you are holding him. And it's something that's like gotten better over time.
As Rusty's kind of, I guess, worked out.
Well, I'm saying like the new boas and pythons that are being bred right now, are the breeding practices have gotten better.
True.
In the last 10, 15 years or so. But yeah, if you were buying a boa 15 years ago, like a lot of the time, like people would breed boas and then, you get probably 15 eggs and you're just like expecting half of them to just die because their lungs don't work within the first couple months.
Yeah, or they don't start eating.
Yeah.
So you're hearing that too? Yeah.
I don't know if it's getting picked up on the microphone,
But you're hearing it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is something we are keeping an eye on him because we want to see what this is, because this is what you have to do with animal care. You got to notice like changes, and this is the first time I've heard him making those noises.
Yeah, and you always want to be aware too, especially when you get something new. Things like what substrate you're putting them on can have an effect because some of the like barks and stuff will make a dust that can sometimes be irritating to like respiratory things like that. Difference in humidity levels can sometimes cause irritation as far as breathing and whatnot. Yeah, that's interesting.
That is
Because it's like his whole body is
doing a
Like-
thing. It's like a hiccup.
Yeah. I noticed that the other day when I was taking him out too, is he was doing a lot of the like jaw stretching kind of thing.
Yeah, a lot of yawning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the snake in the building that we were going to be the ones keeping an eye on for health issues because he's the one who's going to be most likely to have them.
Yeah. So then at this phase, like he's 13, 14 years old, somewhere in there. So like he's past the phase probably where he's just gonna like die just because his body is bad. Like a lot of like you'll see with like year-old snakes.
Yeah, where it's
But
like,
they still, I said a lot of the times when you're bred the way that he probably was bred, you're still looking at a shorter lifespan. Whereas for a normal ball python, you're probably looking at a 20 to 25 year average lifespan.
Which is pretty
But
good.
for something like this, you know, if he were to pass away at 15, it probably wouldn't be that crazy.
And that's close to what it is in the wild, honestly, for these snakes. Snakes are one of those animals that their lifespan practically doubles in captivity. Just because the slower you get, the more susceptible to predators you get. And they have a lot of predators. We've gone over this here at the Science Center when people come in. Jeez, every time he does that, I'm just like, ooh. Everything wants to eat a snake, man. Birds, large mammals, other reptiles, other snakes.
It's good meat.
Yeah, no, it's great. My dad lived in Cameroon for a while, and he's probably eating these things.
It's good meat, and they, for how, you know, fierce their reputation is, they don't fight back much.
Yeah, that's the thing. Snakes have this great reputation for being very tough, very violent, you know, aggressive animals. And then you actually get to handling them and you realize they are some of the most mild-mannered critters. They're very shy and very, very... Yeah, like I said, mild-mannered is the best way to put it.
Because, I mean, you think about, like, an animal like Casper, where it's, like, non-venomous, doesn't have a very strong bite,
Not fast.
though not very fast, and it's like, okay, the way I catch my food is I gotta find something that's small enough for me to fully wrap my body around and squeeze to death, basically.
And that's going to walk in front of me.
Yeah.
Like, I can't chase after it.
When it's like, you know, if I were to get into a fight with Casper, what options does Casper have to beat me? And the answer is none.
Yeah, like, nature is not always fair in the matchups that can happen. Sometimes an animal winds up where it's like, I can do nothing.
Yeah, and a lot of the times then the resort is, I'm just gonna do a big waste dump. I'm gonna poop and pee all over the place and just hope you think this is gross and leave me alone.
Which is shockingly effective.
Yeah, very effective. That's why
Almost every animal will do this. This is actually a reason why when people get really scared, we will urinate and defecate involuntarily sometimes. When you get scared enough, you do this too. So let's not judge the snake either on that front.
Yeah, and anyone who's gone and like picked up a frog outside knows how it goes.
Yeah, nature also doesn't have shame.
Yeah.
No animal is ashamed if it has to. Jeez. It has to do that. It's hey, I survived. It's like, also there are no diapers in nature. That is interesting. He's making that noise.
Yeah.
Any other animals you think we should look at? Any other animals with stuff coming up? I mean, Rosie's 5th birthday is coming up in a few months, right?
Yeah, Rosie the snapping turtle is going to be 5 in July.
Which is like a milestone. I mean, it's for a turtle getting past 5 years old in the wild is pretty close to basically you're guaranteed to make it.
Who else is new? So, longtime viewers will remember we had the trout, and those trout mostly got released last summer. We have a couple of them still, and you can see those. Spin you around quick. Over there. So that's last year's batch. Those ones are about a year and 3 months old now. That you're seeing in that tank. But these guys are the new ones that we just got this year. So these guys are about 3 months old right now. And there's probably, I would guess, about 200 of them in there that are hopefully, mostly, or near all of them are going to make it to the summer. They're going to get released in the same location that we did the ones last year out at the Clearwater River. So yeah, they're new. We got them in December. They all hatched. So it's probably their stream debut. He's actually swallowing now. When we last checked on him with the camera, he hadn't even started swallowing it yet, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're seeing that nice stretching out of his...
You can see him kind of panting there.
Of his, like, underneath his jaw there. You can see how stretched out he is.
And just like I say, this is an athletic process for a snake. You can see how tired he is. Like, look at his chest right there, right at that first bend. After the big kind of loop there, he is like And that's because, well, he doesn't have a lot of endurance. He has enough endurance to constrict a prey animal and then hopefully eat it.
Yeah. And
There's a little extra effort in today's.
then boas and pythons are probably a little more, like, equipped for endurance than even most snakes are, because they're like one of the only ones that actually have two lungs that work.
Yeah, most snakes have an asymmetrical set of lungs, which is actually kind of cool. But yeah, so he is currently taking a breather, which again, like we talked about, that tracheal tube is possible for him. Again, like we we're talking about, like being able to stop and breathe while eating isn't always feasible. And this is a thing very unique to mammals, is being able to breathe and eat at the same time. Reptiles kind of gotta pick one or the other, so you gotta get stuff in your mouth pretty quick.
Yeah, that's the classic, like, the lizard thing, too, where they can't run and breathe at the same time.
Yeah, a lot of them can. I think only monitor lizards can. Which is kind of interesting, given that monitor lizards are actually the closest living relatives to snakes here. Mm-hmm. Now, they're interesting. Snakes are interesting, and they're related to a lot of interesting animals. It's one of the things I like about them is there's really not a whole lot like them. Legless lizards is not quite the same, you know?
Yeah, it's a long line of adaptions that have resulted in something that is
So
very, very, very specialized, but also kind of not.
yeah,
it's a
like
weird
snakes.
niche.
You've seen all of our different snakes. Like, one of the things I like to point out is that in the wild, Sally, our hognose snake, would be insectivorous mostly. Charlie, our garter snake, would mostly go for like frogs and slugs and snails. Whereas like a lot of our other snakes are going for small vertebrates and stuff, but there's like bird-eating snakes, there's egg-eating snakes, there's all sorts of, like Finn was talking about today, like the what is it, the rubber
boas.
the rubber boas that have like a specialization in eating like young animals, like young rodents, and they have a big tail that they'll swing basically like a club at the adults to keep the parents away while they're eating these little baby mice and stuff. Crowley is a really specialized desert snake. Snakes do a lot with a relatively uniform body plan. It's something kind of incredible, where it's like, what are the big differences in snakes' anatomy? It's like the really specific head shape, the really specific widths of everything in relation to each other.
Yeah, before
total size.
Yeah, before like the advent of like, you know, genetic sequencing, like they would basically, when they're categorizing animals, they would find like one trait and be like, okay, this is the thing that makes this thing. And for snakes, it was the jaws.
Yeah, their jaws are unlike anything else on Earth. That just the fact they have 10 articulating jaw bones and everything, it's incredible. No, they're an animal that's really, honestly, when you know what to look for, really easy to spot. Like the lack of an external ear, the spectacle scale instead of a blinking eye, the belly scales, which you can kind of see on Rusty here, the short tails in comparison to their body length. A lot of people tend to think, oh, it's like half that thing is their tail. It's like, no, actually, it's only about an eighth to a tenth usually. Like snakes,
Rusty's tail is maybe 4 inches long.
yeah, and for a snake that's like longer than either of us is tall.
Yeah.
Like
7+ foot long snake.
yeah, like snakes are really distinct in nature, which makes it really easy to figure out if an animal is a snake or not. Not every animal has that lucky, like, there we go. There's some animals that even today have still been reclassified quite dramatically. Pronghorn.
Yeah, all the various antelope adjacent things.
Yeah,
Turtles, great example of that too.
yeah, turtles is I know there's some herpetologists who don't talk to each other anymore over turtles. Because what was the final thing on that with the DNA? It's like they're just not closely related to any of the
Yeah, they're like
reptiles.
closest living relatives. They're like crocodilians, I guess.
And it's like closest in air quotes. Like they're not even archosaurs.
Yeah, they're not archosaurs. I think it's
Which archosaurs
like
is a kind of specific group of.
God, what did they end up putting them in? I want to say they put them in with like mosasaurs and stuff like that.
I heard
like
plesiosaurs, because
it
mosasaurs
was
are.
plesiosaurs is what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of a fun thing is.
Plesiosaurs and pliosaurs.
Yeah, plesiosaurs and pliosaurs are an extinct group of reptiles that probably everyone's passingly familiar with if you had a prehistoric animal dinosaur sort of phase as a kid.
Loch Ness monsters.
Yeah, picture like the kind of outdated version of that. But yeah, like That's like the closest relatives they were thinking to turtles, which I think puts them in. They are in Reptilia, which is true reptiles.
Yeah.
Because there is a group of animals called parareptiles, which is a whole deal that we may eventually, Ryan and I might go into at one point on a live stream. Not this one, because that's a whole can of worms. But Ryan mentioned mosasaurs. Kind of a fun thing about mosasaurs as a prehistoric animal is they're oddly closely related to modern animals. One of those being snakes and monitor lizards. They're one of the few animals from the Mesozoic that's pretty distinctly what's called a squamate reptile, and that's lizards and snakes. It's really cool. No, I love the weird classification stuff when that figures out. Like, I mean, we're talking about turtles, and we got one right there. We can look at it. It's the great thing of turtles have been baffling for well over a century, and probably will remain a little bit of a puzzle.
Because yeah, you think about them, and it's like
They're not quite
even
like
if you try and break them down by like the physical traits. Like imagine trying to categorize a turtle without
The
gene
shell.
sequencing, and it's like, okay, what features does it have? Well, it's got scales.
It's got a shell. Yeah, like if you look for something that's like a trait that other animals share, it's pretty much scales and claws.
Yeah.
So
So it's like, okay, it's got claws, so it's like post-amphibian. It's got scales, so it's not mammalia. It's a reptile somewhere in there.
Yep, it's reptile or parareptile, and thankfully it's reptile. And because the thing is, turtles are really unique for reptiles. I went over this in one of my live streams early when I started working here. Turtles have beaks, which pretty much no other living reptiles have. The shell is a really unique structure of ribs and vertebrae and their sternum. Their eyes are actually rather unique. The fact is they can see quite well in the dark. Turtles' vision is quite much more like birds than it is like lizards or snakes.
Well, and even like the diversity of them too. Like think about how different like a sea turtle is versus a
Galapagos,
tortoise,
or a snapping turtle,
Yeah.
or a soft shell turtle. Like even like the hard shell is not a universal.
and like the shapes of the shells can be so drastically different. You know, compare the box turtle we're looking at now to the snapping turtle we were looking at before, and like that's a
Massive
dramatic difference for something that is like a skeletal difference.
Yeah, turtles are really just something unique, and they're really fun to study. The more you learn about turtles, the more you're like, wait, what? They can do what? Like snapping turtles was recent discovery is that they can take in oxygen through like the inside of their throat and the cloaca to like passively absorb oxygen, but in the winter. That's really weird, and that's really cool. There's like so many things about turtles.
Well, the other weird thing with the turtles is talking about like the origin of the shells too. Is like forever they assumed that like the back part of the shell, the carapace, was like the first thing that developed.
Oh, then they
But,
found, like,
a
a
lot of the
fossil.
more recent fossil evidence is actually suggesting that the bottom part, the plastron, is the first part that developed.
Which
as,
makes
like,
sense
a
for-
leverage mechanism for burrowing, basically.
Yeah, and then it was co-opted for a defensive thing. There was an aquatic one that was discovered. Turtles are also the other thing is they're in a shockingly old group of reptiles.
Yeah.
There have been turtles since like the Triassic or something.
Yeah, I want to say they're like mid-Jurassic. I want to.
Is like the first modern.
You get back a ways and you start getting question marks about, okay, when do we say this is not a turtle and when is this a turtle? You see the same thing with snakes, where it's
And
like,
crocodiles.
like when
Late
does the snake quit being?
A weird
Snakes are a spin-off of lizards, basically, and it's like when does it quit being a lizard and start being a snake?
And the big thing that I've heard for the snakes is that its body proportion. It's actually something where, well, we don't have any living snakes with it. There are plenty of snakes in the fossil record that have legs and are fully accepted as snakes. Legs, it's kind of funny when you listen to herpetologists talk about snakes and lizards and how they classify them. Legs, they make a point of not bringing up legs because it's kind of irrelevant.
Yeah, and even, we think about it as not having legs, but like Rusty still has vestigial legs.
Yeah, they're little spurs.
Yeah, the little spurs that are on the other side of their cloaca. Yeah, the boas and pythons especially show them pretty well.
Yeah. But yeah, turtles, it's one of the ones where it's like, there's been some semi-shelled reptiles in Earth's past that it's still a debate. Like the ones from the Triassic, I think, are somewhat debated if they're actually a turtle or not.
Yeah.
It's really funny. It's one of those things where it's like, yeah, the fossil evidence can be a bit unclear because you can't DNA test a fossil, unfortunately. especially something that old. No, turtles are still pretty old compared to modern reptiles. Like we were just talking about like snakes and lizards. Snakes, for like definitively a snake, is late Cretaceous.
Yeah, 110-ish.
Like 90 something million years ago. It's really recent in geologic terms. Lizards are like mid-Jurassic. Which the funnier thing is we tend to think of like all these reptiles from being old animals like from the Mesozoic, but then you look at like a lot of the modern reptiles and it's like, oh, they're relatively young, and then you look at when the first mammals are around and it's mid to late Triassic and it keeps getting pushed back and you're like, mammals are older than lizards.
Yeah. It's one of those weird things where, like, because when we learn it in high school, we tend to learn it as like this hierarchical thing with like mammals at the top because we love to put ourselves on top of hierarchies. We like end up frame it as like we're the most modern, we're the most developed. Really, birds are way newer.
Yeah, birds
are, even though we tend to put ourselves above birds in these hierarchies.
It's really funny because mammals are a really old group of animals, and I've talked about this with people here, but the Mesozoic was, it's the time of the dinosaurs, but mammals, we were doing pretty dang good at that time too, and we're pretty diverse.
Just weren't big.
and even that generality of us not being big, there were some decent exceptions to that rule. One of the ones is like they recently found, like in the past 5 years, there was that mammal in China that was about the size of a Labrador Retriever, which is large.
Yeah,
by animal standards.
We don't think of that as being like a big animal, but because they're smaller than we are. But
most
like a
animals.
Labrador Retriever is bigger than probably 90% of the species in the world, if not more.
Yeah, and the one thing I let people always forget is the average size of an adult dinosaur was around the size of a sheep. Most dinosaurs were these giant animals we tend to think of, but mammals were large and complex. They were semi-aquatic mammals, they were flying mammals in the late Cretaceous. Mammals were doing kind of just as well as reptiles at the time, but yeah, we tend to learn, like you said, we learn like the age of reptiles, the age of fish, the age of like mammals, that sort of stuff, when Earth's history with life, life's history, is not as simple as that.
Well, and again, talking about like size bias stuff, part of that is just because we tend to think of big stuff as being more important. There's like a psychological thing that's happening there.
Yeah.
But the other element of it is the fossil record, and stuff that's bigger is a lot more likely to be fossilized and keep.
Big
and you
stuff's
see that
durable.
even with like, a big animal, like you find the big long bones a lot more often than you find the little,
little
finger
ribs.
bones and stuff like that.
Yeah, like there's a set of bones that is very frequently lost in carnivorous dinosaurs, the belly ribs, the gastralia. It's because they're relatively small compared to the other bones, and they often get washed away by water.
Rodents, or they'll get swept away when it rains, or just moved around as the world around them moves.
And they get lost, and we didn't know about them in some animals until very recently. But yeah, no. I mean,
there's a pretty substantial size bias in the fossil record towards stuff that's a lot bigger.
Which is why we think of prehistoric animals as all being these giant things, where in reality, most animals, again, like the size of a sheep is like the average for large wildlife. Again, most animals are small. Because let's be real, being big is a bit tough, a bit expensive.
You need more food.
Yeah.
especially for a mammal.
Yeah, think how much food we eat, man. I mean, that's something we should talk about. I guess circles last little thing back to the snakes. We might notice that some of our snakes kind of forego eating at feedings, like Artemis or Casper, and sometimes Genie. Snakes don't need a lot of food since they are reptiles. They have a lower metabolism, meaning when they're sitting doing nothing, they burn less energy. They can go quite a long time without eating. I think I mentioned, 14 months was the record a ball python had.
Yeah, you'll hear the rumor every once in a while of the ball python going 2 years without eating. But yeah, you'll verifiably see them be a year plus.
And it's something that they can do, and they'll have to do in the wild. Reptiles like crocodiles are a great example. If you ever seen those documentaries of the wildebeest and zebra and antelope crossing the rivers for big migrations in Africa, a lot of those crocodiles haven't eaten since the last time they came through. One of the reasons they are pretty hungry, but also they're able to make it that long because those unique metabolisms. Reptiles, I really wish I came up with this phrase because someone else came up with it in a video I watched a few weeks ago, and it's just a great one, is their biology affords them a level of patience that's simply just physically unattainable for other animals. Because if we tried to wait for 2 weeks for food, 3 weeks for food, we're dead. That's just because we waited too long and we need a lot of food.
Yeah,
yeah.
and instead you can compare that to even, if you look around the science center and see some of our other warm-blooded critters like finches. Finches can starve to death in like 2 days.
Yeah, we need to keep feeding them quite a bit. Small animals need a lot of food. That is the one disadvantage of being small, is you can't pack on a lot of weight.
Yeah.
Anyone who's seen chickadees in Minnesota will tell you in the winter, chickadees, it's a radical change in their behavior. They get a little bit more aggressive. They get a little bit more carnivorous. Walking to work, I think like the week before I left for Christmas vacation, I saw a pair of chickadees eating another songbird. And that's not uncommon. They'll gnaw on little bones and stuff to get some calcium and get some protein.
That's kind of another maybe interesting thing to touch on here is perceptions of carnivory, herbivory, omnivory, where we tend to think of animals as being carnivores or herbivores, but like almost everything is omnivorous to some degree, pretty much except for snakes.
Yeah, snakes are one of the few obligate carnivores. I mean, one of the things when you say like everything's willing to nibble, there was a study done the past couple of years where someone was saying like, what's the first animal on a deer carcass in the woods? And they were really baffled initially because it was like, they did this like 10 times, and it's like almost every time it's another deer that's just like, oh, Frank's dead. Let me just get a little nibble on the bones there. Because deer in their natural diet don't get a lot of calcium and salts and protein. So what they do is they supplement that with
That's why you can throw a
meat.
salt lick out in your yard and actually get deer to come to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing how omnivorous some of these animals. I'm sure a lot of people have seen those videos of like cows on farms with free-range chickens, where the cow's eating food and little baby chickens are beep, 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 walking by, and then the cow just kind of scoops one of them up. Because
and it said sometimes you think of it as like an accidental thing even, but like it's a deliberate part of the diet. Because think about if you're like a giraffe. We think of a giraffe as being like an herbivore that's up eating just leaves up in the trees. But think about how many bugs you're eating if you're just like indiscriminately just like eating stuff out of the top of a tree.
Yeah, they're
and like we think of it as like an accidental thing, but like it's part of the diet. Like it's a thing that is necessary for them to like get that.
Yeah, it's getting them their protein and calcium intake and chitin and stuff. It's how they get certain proteins. Yeah, herbivores are going to ingest a lot of bugs. It's kind of interesting. Humans are very particular in what we eat, and that's somewhat a modern convention, but also just generally primates, we tend to be a bit more selective in what we eat. But most animals, once they find the food they eat, they're not too worried about stuff coming along for the ride on their food, because, well, hey, I think the joke from The Simpsons is, it's called toppings. It's flavor. But yeah, thank you for doing this kind of long video with us. This is how we killed about
an hour.
Yeah, about an hour. Hopefully we'll do.
Maybe we'll stream more. Who knows?
We might not. We're still figuring out this year because it is coming up on summer.
If you want more streams,
Tell us.
yeah, great bit.